The Adeptus Sororitas is an all-female organization of the Imperium of Man. In particular, it is a division of the Adeptus Ministorum or ecclesiarchy, the state church of mankind. It is divided into many sectors with many purposes, from the battle-hardened warriors of the Orders Militant to the graceful healers of the Orders Hospitalier. These women serve the God Emperor of mankind all across the galaxy in whatever way they can. Today, this historiator intends to educate you on the matters of war gear and its use by the Sisters of Battle. When the sisterhood was in its infancy during the horrific age of apostasy, they were tricked into serving the tyrannical Goge Vandire, a man with a name so sickening our blessed Imperium ought to tape it to a boot and stamp it out of existence. However, there is one part of his legacy that endures and persists to this day, even after Alicia Dominica, the greatest of the Sisters Matriarchs, took his head: the Adeptus Sororitas power armor. It is based on the same foundational systems employed by the Adeptus Astartes, though it forgoes many features that would require gifts from GNC to use. Nevertheless, it does offer the same degree of protection, or at least the closest equivalent a mere mortal can get. Power armor, as far as Sororitas carapace goes at least, is not something that can be easily mastered. It requires extensive training and experience, demanding that the wearer treats it like a second skin. It is very common to see battle sisters with their carapace on even when out of combat as a result. There is also a variant dedicated solely to the Sister Hospitaliers. It's meant to keep them safe while they treat the wounded in combat conditions. The armor is sealed and treated against toxins or bioweapons, and usually it's coated in incense. As for the helmets adorned by battle sisters, most are given the Sabbat pattern Sororitas helm, which has been the standard since Millennium 38. Its visor contains limited psycho-ocular buffering and a full suite for spectrum filtering, which allows the wearer to operate comfortably in otherwise befuddling environments. Dark, foggy, etc., this helmet is perfect for it. There is a variant with the traditional fleur-de-lis of the sisterhood plastered to the front faceplate. It is an honorable icon meant to distinguish sisters who have performed exceptionally well. You'll often see it among elite groups like the Celestian Squads. Furthermore, the sisterhood must also have tools for slaying the enemy. The primary weapon you will see any battle sister using is that of the Godwin de Oz pattern bolter. It has been standard issue for millennia, becoming iconic and even sacred to many among the ranks. It is described by one particular tome as the first and foremost of the Holy Trinity of Bolter, Flamer, and Melta, with which they deliver justice to the manifold enemies of mankind. It was designed specifically for the Adeptus Sororitas, being blessed by the Canoness Superiors of various orders. It is earned by all sisters upon becoming a battle sister, though they are trained in the weapons beforehand. These firearms are also considered heirlooms, requiring careful maintenance by specialized serfs and servitors. But of course, it is not enough to have martial capabilities. No, the most important tool in any pious warrior's belt is that of their faith. As such, every member of the sisterhood is given a chaplet ecclesiasticus, a string of adamantine beads bearing religious iconography. The beads represent penitent acts, though depending on the veterancy of the sister, a single bead could count as 10, 100, or even 1,000 such acts. You will also note the purity seals dotting their equipment. The seal itself is a piece of parchment containing litanies, promises, oaths of penitence, or something else, affixed to armor with wax, protective sealants, or electrum casings. Usually they represent deliverance from the forces of heresy by the Emperor's hand. Liveries are the cloth and colors worn by the sisters. They are representative of what order they hail from. As an example, this seraphim proudly bears the colors of the Bloody Rose. And finally, the tattoo or electu emblazoned upon the cheeks of most sisters. They are devotional markings, usually shaped as a fleur-de-lis, but they can vary. These tattoos are a mark of piety, a declaration that they are loyal to the sisterhood, mankind, and most importantly, the God Emperor. To catch a glimpse of it as a foe means that your death is already at hand, and it will be the last thing you ever see. Even with faith, armor, and a bolter in hand, one can never have too many methods of slaughtering heretics. If anything, you can only ever be saddled with too few. As such, it is common to see weapons such as bolt pistols carried as a secondary. In some cases, like with the Seraphim, they may be dual-wielded. Seraphim in particular are taught to refine their skills to such an impressive degree that they are more accurate with both bolt pistols in hand than your average battle sister is with a bolter. After all, they make use of jump packs, capable of letting them soar through the air at blistering speeds. They need to be light and accurate so as to maintain swiftness and stability. You will also see plasma pistols and even high-powered stub revolvers used in some instances. Typically, the former is employed by sister superiors, palatines, or generally individuals who are above the rank and file. Combat knives are carried as a part of their kit, and sometimes the sororitas will affix heavy spiked blades to their bolters known as sarisas. Frag grenades and crack grenades are not unusual to see as well. Furthermore, the Sisters of Battle are trained in every form of weapon imaginable, even if some orders or groups may have their preferences. Should a battle sister run out of ammunition, run her blades dull, and spend one final grenade, she may very well pick a firearm from the corpse of a nearby guardsman. Auto guns, auto pistols, and shotguns are foundational weapons, standard issue for novitiate militants. Remember, with rare exceptions, a bolter is only earned once a sister is fully sanctified. Until then, they must make do with lesser war gear. That said, some novitiates are gifted with a condemner bolt gun, a bolter with a stake crossbow affixed to it. These weapons are useful against witches, striking fear into any psyker unfortunate enough to see one. They may seem archaic, but they are mighty. They fire a silver stake engraved with disrupting sigils, interdicting a witch's connection to the warp, thereby making it easier to rid the Imperium of their curse. Flamers are vital to the efforts of the Sisterhood as well, allowing them to go forth and purify entire regions with weapons that spout fire from their nozzles. Dominions will carry them to battle alongside that of the Novitiate Purgatus. Seraphim have a handheld variant, designed to be dual-wielded like that of their bolt pistols. Speaking of, the Seraphim will also employ Inferno pistols, handheld melta weapons. Melta weapons, such as the melta gun, melta bomb, or multi-melta, are fusion weapons designed to destroy armor at close range. They produce energetic beams of heat. It is not uncommon to hear an odd hissing noise alongside their typical hum and subsequent roar. That is because the beams will boil away any water in the air. Vehicles, armored heretics, all are fodder when faced with these instruments of death. You will find specialized sisters, such as that of a Dominion or in the case of a multi-melta Retributor, wielding them effectively. Some Dominions, or even Retributors, will have the privilege of using combi weapons, weapons that combine different types of weaponry such as flamers, meltas, or plasma guns. Plasma guns are as they sound. They fire plasma and are a favorite amongst the Dominions. They are very dangerous, however, running the risk of overheating and detonating if not used with exceptional care. To conclude the war gear of the Dominions, Storm Bolters are double-barreled variants of the standard bolter. They do require a specialist touch, which is why you see the Dominions using them. That said, although the Dominions have had their time in the spotlight, we have yet to conclude the Retributors' war gear. Recall that the holy trinity of weaponry for the Sisterhood is that of the bolter, flamer, and melta. This is symbolized perfectly with the Retributors, as the heavy bolter and heavy flamer are employed in concert with multi-meltas. Due to their excessive weight and firepower, Retributors require bulkier, specialized armor, with power packs designed to fuel, sustain, or supply their weapons in the heat of combat. They are often over-encumbered as a result, moving slower than their lighter armored counterparts. Sometimes the enemy doesn't deserve a quick end via bolt. Sometimes the enemy persists stubbornly in their filthy existence. Sometimes a more personal touch is needed. The Adeptus Sororitas knows this well, and thus they equip their sisters with the most potent of melee weapons. Starting with the power weapons, these are rare and highly sought-after tools. These weapons emit a hazy field of energy that wraps around the impact zone. As an example, a power sword will emit energy around the blade, allowing it to carve cleanly through even the toughest of armor. In fact, the power sword is the most common form of power weapon distributed around the Sisterhood, often seen with Sister Superiors and beyond. But power fists, power mauls, power spears, and beyond are seen in rare instances. The chainsword, on the other hand, is its own weapon entirely. It is a sword with powered teeth running along a single edge. It is similar to a chainsaw, and thus comes the name. The sisterhood loves to employ a larger two-handed variant known as the eviscerator. They are heavy, tiring to use, and quite unwieldy, but their power more than makes up for it. It doesn't matter how armored you are, how much flesh you contain on your person, you are not but food to an eviscerator. It is typically seen in service of the Sister Repentia. For the most part, it cannot be used in combination with another weapon given its size and weight. On another note, some groups in the Sisterhood, such as the Celestians, will carry shields alongside that of their melee weapons and sidearms. In particular, the Storm Shield, which is a large tool capable of projecting an energy field that bolsters the physical element. In some cases, you will see them holding a Presidium Protectiva, a shield constructed from layers of armoplast and ceramite. They are rumored to contain small fragments of armor originally worn by the God Emperor himself. However, with the Lord Regent's blessing, and in the name of remaining objective, the legitimacy of such a claim is questionable at best. The war gear of the Sisterhood is legion and diverse, so diverse, in fact, that this historiator couldn't even dream of covering it all. However, these are a handful of important devices or items you may see on the field of battle. Many elements of the Sisterhood like to carry blessed standards, banners that are blessed many times by the prioress of a convent. Similarly, some sisters known as imagifiers will carry a tool known as a simulacrum imperialis. It is a large staff bearing the bones and likeness of some ancient saints. To hold one, let alone witness one, is an honor very few can hope to experience. Loudhailers are another way the sisters project their faith, serving as sound amplification devices widely used throughout the Imperium. The sisters will broadcast songs and litanies, signaling the approaching doom of heretics, xenos, mutants, witches, and neverborn. Other demonstrations are more subtle, reserved for only the highest echelons. The Rosarius is an amulet hiding a potent conversion field generator that protects the wearer from attack. Any not versed in the technology would view its activation as an intervention from the God Emperor himself. Other subtle but more common tools may be that of the reliquary, a box, casket, or case meant to contain a relic, charm, or a holographic image of the former two. And finally, the prayer books containing thousands upon thousands of verses for the galaxy's holiest women to recite when at war or before bed. How does one become a member of the Adeptus Sororitas? Today, this historiator intends to educate you on the matters of recruitment within the Sisterhood. Our story begins not with the shouts of a drill abbot or whistle of gunfire, but with a busy cathedral nestled within the temple district of a lower hive. This cathedral houses a local detachment of the Schola Progenium. The Schola is one of the Imperium of Man's most vital institutions, seeing as it is tasked with raising the next generation of the Imperium's best and brightest. In fact, it is responsible for a sizable portion of workers trained in the various trades of the Adeptus Terra. All of these would-be workers start as children. In particular, the Schola Progenium takes in the orphaned youth of Imperial society's more esteemed aspects. Nobility, clergy, officers of the Astra Militarum or Navis Imperialis, governing officials, and beyond. If one of these specified individuals bore children before perishing, their offspring will be sheltered as progena. While some might be inclined to think that these youth ought to be given a moment of reprieve, a chance to breathe and process whatever horrors they may have just endured, the Schola gives no such thing. Indeed, the institution operates under the premise that to falter in duty is weakness, that pain can be overcome, and that nothing excuses a failure to uphold one's role in life. In this case, we shall take a look at a female progena. When she first comes to the orphanage, she may be terrified, intimidated, and uncertain of her future. This is rectified immediately, for she will be given gray attire before being ushered into a room full of other progena. Thus begins her education. She will learn to pray fervently, to have the capacity to recite holy litanies without needing to reference the texts. She will be made resilient to discomfort through fasting, sleep deprivation, and other means of cruelty. As with all progena, she will learn to read and write, study basic arithmetic, pore over history, and analyze politics, all whilst coming to understand what it means to be subservient to one's master and to command one's subordinates. But it is not enough to train the mind. Many aspects of the Imperium require rigorous physical work, and so our future sororitas will be put to work under drill abbots and abbesses, veterans who served in the Imperium's never-ending wars before their current role. While most candidates will falter or be forever scarred by the lessons of these instructors, this progena will exceed expectations. Her mind is sharp, and her body has the capacity to be honed into a weapon. Thus she is given a commendation by one of the drill abbesses. Shortly thereafter, she will be referred to either the convent prioress or convent sanctorum. While some of her counterparts have excelled in more mentally taxing fields, thus making them worthy of the dialogus, she is far and above a warrior, making her worthy of becoming a sister militant. Given her proximity to Ophelia 7, this unnamed girl is sent to the convent sanctorum as a novice. This is where her trials truly begin. Whatever hardships the drill abbesses of the Schola made her suffer before will now pale in comparison to the tests issued by their counterparts in the sisterhood. The novice is denied individualism, being compelled to adopt religious contemplation in its stead. Furthermore, discipline is instilled within her above all else. Once basic conditioning has been concluded, the novice will be retaught the skills necessary to purge heresy from the stars. Violence, violence, violence. Violence is taught to her as faith in its rawest, purest form, a blazing fire with which she illuminates and scorches the shadows. Before long, she has grown a little, not just physically, but as a fledgling member of the sisterhood. Now she is ready to become a Constantia, merely a step away from becoming a sister adepta. While she already possesses an extensive range of talents that put her on the same level as some of the Astra Militarum's best, she's still considered ill-taught by the Adeptus Sororitas. This is where she will learn to use weapons, such as the Godwin de Oz pattern bolter, and presumably this is coupled with baby steps in power armor. Furthermore, she is taught of things that many in the Imperium would never know. While the Constantia will not know much in the grand scheme of things, she will gain a stunning resistance to the parasitic lies of heresy. Even the will fail to corrupt her. This is her affirmation to the imperial creed, to the sisterhood, and to the God Emperor of mankind. Such a beautiful display of faith and promise prompts the convent to promote her to the rank of Cantus. Indeed, she has mastered every skill, triumphed over every trial. She has learned the fundamentals of her sacred role, but she must learn more, much more. Perhaps she can kill the enemy. Perhaps a particular order has taken a keen interest in her. But she needs to learn how to advise, to heal, and more. Even the most battle-crazed woman can put down her bolter in favor of another, more pressing purpose. It is only after the Cantus has mastered all that she needs to know that she will be judged to be worthy of joining an order. She, alongside her peers, are gathered in the convent's great hall from there, lined up before an assortment of canonesses and palatines from different orders. These gatherings can vary in nature. Some can be ceremonial, celebrating the welcoming of thousands of women into the sisterhood at large. Others are more reserved, consisting of a meager handful of candidates. Our Cantus, the one we've been following, will wait with stunning patience, watching as each young woman is called by name to join their new order. Before long, her name is called by a palatine hailing from the Order of Our Martyred Lady. Angelica Ventari. Angelica, now recognized by name, takes her place at the palatine's side as a novitiate. But although she need only take her vows to ascend to the rank of Battle Sister, she's not ready just yet. Angelica will continue to train, drilled in the ways of her new order. Its beliefs, its doctrines, methodology, history, all of it is burned into her mind for months at a time. In reality, one can say that this process never ends, ceasing only when Angelica inevitably goes to the God Emperor's side, like that of all faithful dead. Even so, it is time for her to become a fully sanctified battle sister of the Order of our Martyred Lady. The Adeptus Sororitas are best known for the Order's militant, the Sisters of Battle, women clad in powered armor marching across the galaxy singing hymns of war and righteousness as they cleanse the Imperium of heresy and corruption. However, the institution as a whole comprises numerous sections including many non-militant orders. Today, this Historder intends to educate you on the matter of Sister Hospitallers and their vitally important work. The Order's Hospitaller, also known as the Sisters Hospitaller, is an institution amongst institutions that holds nearly no equal in the wider Imperium. Its primary purpose is dedicated to that of medical care. Often this purpose can be executed in many ways. Combat surgeons, physicians, nurses, aides, and even individuals responsible for mortuary affairs can find themselves under the Hospitaller's umbrella. Orders falling under the Hospitaller operate all throughout the galaxy, not just alongside the Order's militant, but within the Astra Militarum, Inquisition, Imperial Navy, and beyond. Where the faithful suffer, there is almost always a Sister Hospitaller around to alleviate the pain. If the unleashes a bioweapon in the heart of a civilized world, the Order's Hospitaller, under inquisitorial supervision, will arrive in short order to study the new pathogen and ultimately eradicate it. Should the Astra Militarum embark on a campaign to reclaim a lost hive, Sister Hospitallers will work aboard warships and on the ground to tend to the wounded. Should an unforeseen disaster take an agri-world, Sister Hospitallers will rush to the scene the moment they catch wind of the crisis. Even the low and destitute members of society are not beyond their care. Indentured servants working off debts to guilds and noble houses, should their masters permit, will be attended by volunteering nursemaids. Furthermore, Sister Hospitallers can be found working in various charities and hospitals throughout the Imperium. In all, even the field chirurgeons and medicae trained by the Munitorum must bow their heads to the Order's Hospitaller and the brilliant women therein. Furthermore, the Hospitaller is as much a scholarly institution as it is a healthcare provider. Like the Officio Medicae, it studies pathogens, the effects of Xenos weaponry on the human body, curses wrought by the and beyond in the name of tending to those in need. A few noteworthy examples could be the Hospitaller's cooperation with the Inquisitorial Ordo Sepulchra in containing and combating bioweapons, its work with the Order's Famulus in mapping bloodlines to help prevent mutations, its vast libraries and collections of tomes written by nursemaids of the past, and even its records on Xenos physiology. Simultaneously, the Hospitaller is known to take up arms in times of great strife. There are plenty of recorded instances in which nursemaids have picked up stubbers, lasguns, and beyond in the name of safeguarding their field hospitals against heretics who underestimate them. Recall that not every member of the Adeptus Sororitas is a Sister of Battle, but every Sororitas is more than versed in the craft of death. There are instances whereby the order's hospitaller will employ its nigh unparalleled expertise to prolong the suffering of blasphemers. Confessors will rely on nursemaids to replace devastated organs, reattach mangled limbs, and stem the bleeding of great gashes during interrogations. One particular order, the Order of the Silent Vow, maintains a permanent contingent within the militant Order of the Valorous Heart. They specialize in forcible life extension and pain amplification. Some theorize that they are still torturing the killers of St. Lucia to this day. Others believe that the Valorous Heart punishes the worst heretics they find by sending them to this mysterious group of women. But of course, we must now turn to the sister hospitallers themselves. Whilst battle sisters tend to be blunt, direct, and even distant from those outside the sisterhood on the battlefield, their eyes fixated solely on purgation and cleansing, nursemaids are warm and compassionate caretakers. These are women whose faith can remain undaunted even amidst the most horrid of conditions. Flooded trenches in a swampland, parasite-ridden hive sewage networks in a war against gene stealers, choking ash wastes along Armageddon Secundus's Hemlock River. It matters not. These sisters will love and care for their patients to the best of their ability and beyond. Why? Because this is what the Emperor has asked of them. From the time they were children, he gifted them with the talent of healing. Said talent was witnessed by their drillabesses, and so they were appropriately ushered into the order's hospitaller. With that in mind, hospitallers also serve as spiritual counselors, often consoling their patients whilst reinforcing their faith. That kind demeanor, however, will vanish swiftly in the presence of corruption. If a hospitaller deems a patient lacking in their faith, she won't hesitate to put them to death. In fact, it isn't uncommon for nursemaids to refuse to offer care to those they feel are undeserving of it, even if they are not heretics. It should also be noted that when it comes to those who are to be interrogated or tortured, these women cannot remain alone or unsupervised with the subject. Simply put, heretics have a habit of being sent to be judged by the Emperor before information can be extracted. Indeed, sister hospitallers make for excellent deliverers of pain and torment, but oversight will always be required. Sisters who venture into war to serve as surgeons receive an impressive suite of war gear. Most famously, hospitaller carapace is issued to those who brave the hells beyond the trenches. Carapace armor is a specialized form of body armor found throughout the Imperium, composed of armoplaz or, sometimes, ceramite plating molded to the body's shape. Carapace can consist of a handful of vests, or it can become the closest to power armor one can get. In some cases, hospitallers will forego the carapace in favor of more traditional power armor, should they have the luxury to do so. Regardless, their protective suits will always remain coated in incense and unguents. Furthermore, they are sealed and treated to be resistant to toxins and chemicals in the field of battle. Hospitaller Medicae tools are a given, and this encompasses a range of items, from medicines and oils to prayer books, to surgical tools and beyond. The quality of their kits are second only to the tools of an Astartes apothecary. Hospitallers will, depending on the individual, wear rings of suffrage. These are rings designed to cause discomfort or even pain when twisted. These rings are meant to remind the women wearing them of their responsibilities and obligations to the Imperium and the Emperor. There are also, of course, the chaplet ecclesiasticus and purity seals utilized by the wider sisterhood. These have been covered in prior lessons. Hospitallers will, of course, arm themselves on the field of battle. Stub revolvers and bolt pistols are common, but just about any firearm isn't beyond their use depending on the circumstances. And, of course, with all that said, this concludes today's lesson. Ephrael Stern is a fascinating case study within Warhammer 40k's lore and galaxy, mainly because she's arguably unique. 40k is full of characters with impossible might, strength, the ability to bend reality, and more. You have powerful beings of malice like the Chaos Gods, godlike men such as the Emperor, perpetuals like Urda who got done dirty, and other oddballs like the warp entity Tauva. And then you go down the chain and you see folks like Magnus, Yvraine, Saint Celestine, ordinary men like Rest in Peace's Yark, and Astartes such as Iconius. In a galaxy that has been worked on by hundreds of writers and literally thousands of people for decades, it is really hard to make a character stand out. And I can point to a few awesome characters that kinda just don't get brought up in wider discussions because they either have fairly self-contained stories or they're just not brought into the wider narrative again. As an example, Battle Sister Myria and Sister Hospitaller Verity. I challenge you to find more than a handful of obscure Reddit posts about them. Some of the stuff in their stories have huge implications that I have included in past lore videos. So why then does Ephrael stand out to me? Well, that's because, again, she's unique. Her very existence is a head-scratcher to some, and I've seen folks legitimately struggle with understanding her comics. So this lore short will explain the basics of who she was, what happened to her, and how she got her abilities. Primarily, I'll only cover the first Demonofuge story, the Screaming Cage, but the rest will be covered in the future. This is supposed to be a simpler episode after all, and generally speaking, I'll save a deep dive for later. So bear in mind that this video is nowhere near exhaustive. Now, let's begin. Ephrael Stern, sometimes referred to as the Demonofuge, is a member of the Adeptus Sororitas through a combination of fate, luck, and most importantly, her unyielding faith in the God Emperor. She was blessed or cursed with the incredible power and knowledge of the Empyrean. She terrifies and fascinates all she encounters, striking awe and suspicion into the Imperium, genuine malice and resentment within the realm of chaos, and actual confusion and frustration in groups like the Necrons. Her power surpasses that of most Psykers, and her strange existence makes her hard to predict and counter. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with her, why have the Sisters of Battle accepted what would be, to them at least, a witch worthy of execution? Well, let's start with her early life. Before Ephrael was born, her parents had promised to relinquish her so that she may become a member of the Adeptus Sororitas. Even before she became a fully fledged battle sister, she showed promise and was eventually able to take her sacred oaths of adherence. This was when she was sent to the Order of Our Martyred Lady and subsequently stationed on the world of Ophelia. From there, she would swiftly rise in her position, becoming a seraphim in record time. Eventually, Ephrael and a detachment of battle sisters were sent to investigate a missing convent of sororitas from the Orders Pronatus. For those of you not versed in the elements of the Adeptus Sororitas, the Pronatus discovers and studies artifacts of importance to the ecclesiarchy, while also protecting them. But, as you will see shortly, some of those artifacts can be very, very dangerous and even downright heretical. When Ephrael and her sisters reached the world of Parnis, they found the servants of Slaanesh. A greater demon, a keeper of secrets called Astaroth, had massacred the convent, and they were just going to be its latest victims. Ephrael, alongside her sisters, fell in battle, but something brought her back. Someone, or rather, lots of someones. You see, the convent had not been killed entirely. Rather, Astaroth took hundreds of sororitas and bound them together, bodies, minds, souls, and all, into a single torturous construct, the Screaming Cage. What Astaroth didn't realize, however, is that it had inadvertently just fused nearly 1,000 of the most pious women in the galaxy together. The Screaming Cage, with the collectively unbroken wills of those that comprised it, resurrected Ephrael with their combined faith. Now returned to life, Ephrael was directed to flee and ultimately managed to escape as the lone survivor, though her sanity at that point was in shambles. She had no recollection of what had happened to her, strange abilities that many saw as outright heretical, and a connection to the Empyrean she couldn't really understand. She'd essentially been reborn and struggled to rationalize this. For an entire 4 years, she was imprisoned and observed, painting many runes and seemingly nonsensical things. One of her sisters then proceeded to attack her, having been possessed by a demon of Slaanesh. Ephrael responded by literally ripping the demon from the body of the fallen woman with her bare hands. This would spark an inquisitorial investigation led by Silas Hand into to her nature to settle the debate of whether she ought to be destroyed or put to good use. The battered woman was put through grueling trials that would break any lacking true faith, but Ephrael would ultimately emerge with her love for the God Emperor intact. As such, Silas' hand saw fit not only to reinstate her as a full member of the sisterhood, but also to return her to the seraphim with the rank of Sister Superior. Obviously, this proved to be controversial. Many genuinely considered Ephrael to be a tainted witch, after all. That said, the investigation had not yet been concluded, and so Silas, Ephrael, and a detachment of the martyred lady would once again return to Parnas. Along the way, an incident with a Slaneshi demon and navigator occurred that I cannot really get into if I want to stay on this platform. So the only thing I can say there is that basically many demons see things differently from us. This demon was seeing various parts of the crew and sisterhood by the brightness of their souls and saw, quote, nothing within Ephrael, as she herself put it. After this incident, the expedition would be marooned on Parnas, where they pushed into the lost convent. Once again, Ephrael would come across the screaming cage in all of its tormented agony. But let's rewind a second, or rather 300 years. I'll quote the graphic novel directly here. Once we were as you, once we were sororitas. Ours was not the way of battle, rather we followed the winding path of study. We found our direction when it was discovered, a greater demon of Slanesh, a keeper of secrets. We knew not how it came to be imprisoned, but our course was clear. Perhaps through study we might better understand the enemy and learn its weaknesses. The price was high. Many of our numbers succumbed to its lies and whispers, and had to be cleansed by sword and fire. So we moved the study here, hidden from righteous eyes until we were certain our knowledge was safe to share. For 300 years we continued our blessed inquiry, and the Imperium forgot we ever existed. Our studies were finally ended when it escaped. He considered himself an artist of pain. We are his masterpiece. Our souls were not enough. He needed still more to leave this plane and return to the great darkness which spawned him. When you and your comrades arrived, Astaroth was waiting and claimed those of you not strong enough to resist him. Sister slew sister. It was not long before you alone remained. Your valor was not enough to withstand them. You fought on with mortal wounds. I remember I jumped. A leap of faith. I died? But you were free of chaos, Ephrael Stern. And we were not finished with you. Astaroth bound us together so that our suffering might be shared equally, but all our minds combined and magnified. We healed your wounds, started your heart beating again, and then we gave you one instruction. Flee. Yes, I remember. I knew nothing other than that I had to get as far away as possible. We hid you from the eyes of the enemy, masked your soul from those who might have sought it out. We had to communicate. Our study had yielded a great knowledge. We worked through you. We knew that the enemy would one day find you, and so we made you strong and fast, that you might defend yourself. When you were attacked, our tie was broken. Now we would share the last of our secrets with you, that you may complete our great work. So, in short, Ephrael is unique. She's not an imperial demon, but she's not a psyker either. She's not a saint, but she's not a witch. She's a demonifuge. The culmination of faith, forbidden knowledge, agony, and wrath. She serves as a repository of everything learned by those within the screaming cage, and was engineered more or less to be able to protect herself and that knowledge. She needs to be durable, strong, able to keep the great enemy away, and hard to see. So the cage made her body capable of taking more punishment. With that increased durability, they gifted her with strength, allowing her to tear through armor with her bare hands. They bestowed unto her power brought on by their knowledge. And of course, the reason demons don't really see anything when they see Ephrael, for the most part, they can still make her out, is because they did this by design. They masked her. Essentially, Ephrael is a reconstituted soul imbued with warp fuckery that was shoved back into her body after being shaped into the perfect weapon. This is why the ruinous powers, servants of Slanesh especially, given her tie to them, fear and despise her. She represents everything chaos hates in mankind. Ephrael is faithful to the Emperor, a bounty of psychic potential. I would personally argue that she's hated for the same reason chaos hates the Emperor, just on a far smaller scale. She's the embodiment of human potential, and furthermore, she understands the war better than, well, just about anyone with exceptions. But alas, that is all for today. If there is one thing I love about Warhammer, it is how unfathomably deep the lore can go. 40k especially can take the smallest of things and run wild with it. A single line of text can send you spiraling down a rabbit hole, and that is very much true of this video. As with all things 40k related, there is a lot to read when researching a topic. That is why it tends to take me longer than normal to make videos on these subjects, and it was when I was working on my Adepta Sororitas video that I noted a specific handful of paragraphs within my 9th edition codex. One thing led to another. Now you have this video, and a series of videos for that matter. I will say that because there is so much, I will not dive fully into every single individual thing. This video really is a chapter of a supercut I intend to release after other chapters are released, and I am guessing altogether the series will be about an hour long at minimum. And I am making this all on my own. I have to read, write, make art, record, edit, animate, export, revise, etc. It's not easy and takes a lot of time, so bear in mind that some topics will need to be glossed over. With that said, please enjoy this animated series. Alicia Dominica is a fascinating and mythical figure within Warhammer 40k. She is, or was, one of the 6 matriarchs of the Adepta Sororitas and technical founder of the Order of the Ebon Chalice. Famously, she is known for beheading the maddened tyrant Goj Vandire after speaking to the Emperor's custodian guard, and by extension, the Emperor himself. As such, she tends to be the matriarch that is portrayed the most often, and is a topic of discussion in 40k's media and community. In fact, she is really the only matriarch that gets proper attention, and understandably so, but it is important to bear in mind that there are 6 matriarchs, not 1, and it is vitally important that their stories be told as well, lest we not understand the full story of Alicia and the sisterhood as a whole. Furthermore, we cannot just discuss the matriarchs, no, we have to discuss all of it. Everything to do with the ecclesiarchy's origins, and by extension that of the sisterhoods. Another thing to note, there is a great deal of uncertainty when discussing anything to do with saints and long-dead figures in Imperial history. While we can confidently look at what, say, Roboute Guilliman is doing or has done, we cannot really say that we know the bigger picture with the matriarchs. Remember, this is the Imperium. Humanity has already lost the vast majority of its history, and now it lives under a brutal authoritarian theocracy, with a revisionist policy for recording events. Furthermore, the sisterhood tends to be very cagey about its own history. These women tend to guard their past, especially events relating to their saints, with lethal efficiency. And whether or not this is for political gain, good reason, or a combination of both, we just don't know. And so that gets us into the beginning of our story, not with Alicia or her sisters, but with the Primarch Lorgar. During the Great Crusade in the late 30th millennium, Lorgar, Primarch of the 17th Legion and son of the Emperor, happened to worship his father as a god. Furthermore, he facilitated that same worship within his Gene sons and the worlds his legion conquered in the Imperium's name. As a general guiding principle for all worlds who happened to worship the Emperor, Lorgar created a piece of text known as the Lectitio Divinitatis. This book's premise was simple, that the Emperor was a godly being and he ought to be worshipped by the masses in a specific manner that served the Imperium at large. This book would spawn a great number of cults across Imperial space, not just within worlds conquered by the 17th. These cults fanatically worshipped the Emperor, preaching from this holy book, though they were a far cry from the Ministorum we know today in M41. But they were the precursors, and their influence was subtle but noteworthy within Imperial space. Furthermore, although the Emperor promoted an atheistic culture, his perceived omnipotence by the wider Imperium, alongside the way he presented both himself and his sons, encouraged them to have faith without believing in gods. This may sound odd, and so I will read this conversation from the book Saturnine. Why are you kneeling? To show respect. Who are you kneeling to? Kneeling is an act of respect or fealty, or it is an act of reverence and devotion. It's not devotion. There are no gods. We burned that lie. Then, fealty. But there is no one here to kneel to, so the fealty is worthless. The Emperor is everywhere. Is he? You kneel to the idea of him as an act of faith? So, which is it, fealty or devotion? Have you destroyed false gods just to build another? He is not false. Is he a god then? There are demons now, so So there must be gods now too? I didn't say that. What do you want, Mercedes? To live. Too late for that now. This ultimately planted the seeds for what we see in M41. As for the various cults, their theology and interpretations tended to differ. In typically less technologically developed worlds were more susceptible to the book's influence. When the Emperor made his sacrifice to defeat Horus, thus interring him on the Golden Throne, he became a martyr, and worship of him exploded faster than most expected. For billions, their Emperor had just sacrificed himself to save humanity from the forces of hell itself, defying the darkest of gods and preserving the light of mankind. It was an affirmation of their beliefs in him as a divine savior. In fact, many believed the Emperor had not only sacrificed himself, but had finally ascended to true godhood within the Immaterium. However, many of these cults would ultimately die off or be absorbed by their stronger counterparts, who spread their influence to neighboring worlds and star systems. One such cult was known as the Temple of the Savior Emperor, led by a man who referred to himself as Photiticus. We do not know his true name, but we know he was an officer of the Imperial Army who partook in the siege of Terra. He garnered a respectable following within the Imperium's military and lower elements of the Administratum. By the time of his death, the Temple of the Savior Emperor held a significant influence over Segmentum Solar, and its influence would spread like an ever-hungering wildfire. It would come to play a dominant role in imperial politics with little intervention from the Astartes and no input from the now missing Primarchs. Now, one reason for the temple's rapid growth and influence was its messaging. While today, the Ministorum's messaging is one of obedience and submission, tending to prioritize instilling a sense of inferiority within wider society, the temple was hopeful. Its message was not one of, burn all heretics, and if you do not worship as we do, you shall be burned too, but rather, let us come together and reunify our broken and battered Imperium through common faith. Let's march forwards into a hopeful future, arm in arm, faithful and pure. And it worked. Of course, another thing to note was that the Imperium was still at a point where public opinion, in terms of institutions like the Temple, did matter. And when an act of violence was committed against blasphemers in its name, it officially condemned that act. Unofficially was a different story, but the mask held and only served to attract more would-be followers. By the start of M32, nearly 2/3 of all Imperial citizens followed the Temple of the Savior Emperor, and with reverence. Of course, the Astartes were exempt from this, still not recognizing the Emperor as a god whilst being relatively estranged due to constant conflict, and the Mechanicus had its own form of worship, so it was relatively isolated as well. At this point, even its closest rival, the Confederation of Light, was unable to contest the political landscape. The High Lords of Terra would ultimately recognize the Temple's influence and potential as a means for controlling the masses, and so the Temple, alongside a few other cults, were recognized as the Imperium's state religion. This would become the early ecclesiarchy and represented the birth of the Adeptus Ministorum. And, further growing the religious influence held over the Imperium, the Ecclesiarch Venerus II was instated as a member of the Senatorum Imperialis. Here the messaging began to change, going from one of hope for the sake of gaining influence to one of wrath as a method of influence. Non-believers and members of other cults were often ostracized, publicly shamed, deemed blasphemers, and soon enough the first executions began. Imperial territory was carved up, with various cardinals being tasked with overseeing the religious growth within different galactic regions. Saints were declared, opulent shrines were erected, cathedrals the size of mountains were constructed. Millions, billions, then tens of billions began making pilgrimages all throughout the Imperium just to catch a glimpse of these new holy spaces and individuals. Soon enough, the act of pilgrimage became a vital part of the imperial economy, filling up the ecclesiarchy's coffers with blinding speed. Some planets were designated as shrine worlds, solely dedicated to worship of the emperor. Some of these worlds would become home to cardinals, thus becoming cardinal worlds so that these religious officials could run their dioceses in peace. For all intents and purposes, the ecclesiarchy's ascension was complete, but there was one teeny tiny problem that needed to be crushed. One pest, that damn Confederation of Light. Rewinding a tad to the end of the heresy, we move to Segmentum Obscurus, where a planet known as Dimimar sits. There a simple cult emerged, one who would, for a time, contest the power of the other most prominent cult, the Temple of the Savior Emperor. The Confederation of Light held a separate viewpoint from its rival. Whilst the ecclesiarchy would build lavish temples and grand spires for the Emperor and his worshippers, the Confederation preached something simpler. They believed the Emperor's sacrifice should serve as an example, and that the average individual should live an honest, humble life, that a true worshipper should be generous, giving, kind, and that extravagant things were arguably sinful. These teachings, in many ways, directly called out the ecclesiarchs and cardinals. In essence, the Confederation was not only challenging the most powerful institution throughout the entirety of the Imperium, it was flat out condemning it. To them, a holy individual doesn't need opulent robes or a giant cathedral. They don't need gold jewelry studded with rubies and diamonds. They don't need to be revered and surrounded by sycophants. No, anyone claiming to be holy with any of those things isn't holy. And although it was fruitless to try and unseat the dominant ecclesiarchy, the Confederation stuck to that premise and remained a vocal and frankly worthy opponent that turned heads in its direction. This back and forth would continue between the two, with both sides attempting to infiltrate and manipulate the other. Eventually, the cauldron of tension boiled over, and the ecclesiarchy turned to genocide. In the 41st millennium, you will often see untold numbers of battle sisters triumphantly crusading within wars of faith. They are glorified, made out to be magnificent. But the history of wars of faith, it's gruesome, and it started with the first. The first war of faith was not meant to purge a Xenos infestation, not meant to beat back a demonic incursion, not designed to put down a heretical cult, but to eradicate a political rival. After compelling the Senatorium Imperialis to pass a unanimous vote condemning the Confederation to its downfall, the ecclesiarchy was permitted to commence its first ever war of faith. And it was far from a war, it was a slaughter of a separate religious group. The Imperial Guard, Navy, Fraterus Militia, any element of the Imperium's military that could be mustered by the ecclesiarchy was sent to Dimimar for a purge. It was a cleansing of biblical proportions, and the Confederation was all but wiped out. Some pockets managed to survive the purge, living in squalor, despair, and hiding, but they were irrelevant. The Confederation, as an institution, was no more, and the ecclesiarchy's ascension was complete. By the end of M33 and the beginning of M34, the ecclesiarchy reigned supreme, having erected a cathedral in every known imperial world, its coffers overflowing with wealth. Instead of using this richness to better the Imperium and improve humanity's status, the ecclesiarchy put it all into building even more cathedrals, whilst funding many more wars of faith, commencing purge after purge, all in the name of securing its hold over the Imperium. Billions lost their lives, families were wiped out in their entirety, prosperous worlds grew poor under the blood-sucking tithes imposed by their cathedrals. Yet simultaneously, this would also bring about a brief period of relative semi-stability within the Imperium, which was now united under a single theocratic banner. However, it should be noted that the Administratum didn't allow itself to be taken over. Remember, the High Lords created the Adeptus Ministorum not out of faith, but as a means of control. They firmly believed the Temple of the Savior Emperor, now the ecclesiarchy, would be a great unifier they could control and keep a hold of. From their point of view, bringing them into the fold of governance would allow for tighter rule and stricter regulation of the masses. In other words, the ecclesiarchy was supposed to be subservient to the High Lords, not the other way around. The Administratum was still the governing body of humanity. The ecclesiarchy was, ultimately, just the state-run religious authority, and so it was argued at the time that the wars of faith were a significant overreach. The Administratum would continuously try to maintain control of what it held, while also attempting to claw back power from the ballooning ecclesiarchy. The stability of the Imperium was fragile and already splintering under the weight of the two colossal bodies. Ultimately, that struggle would come to a head when a single man rose to power, and that man was Goj Vandire.
There it was. That familiar, preternatural chill, serving as a kiss of death amidst an otherwise tranquil evening. One wouldn't expect it given the humid nature of the night and lack of wind, and yet it made itself felt nonetheless. The eve of Sanguinala, a time for celebrating triumph, heroism, and martyrdom. Yet for Miranda Cadell, there would be no holiday cheer, nor would there be a partaking in the jollity with her beloved. The reason for such isolation, on a night one ought to spend with those closest to them? One of grimness, a sickening darkness, so horrific and unknowable, the mind failed to grasp its wickedness. Never born. The isolated area the cabin had been erected within, alongside the creature's incessant need to avoid crowds, told Miranda all she needed to know. It was likely frail, unwilling to partake in open confrontation. Its fear was demonstrated by its choice of targets. Lone households, unable to seek the aid of a neighbor. Even the common layman was threatening enough, in significant numbers. It was too obvious to be among the Lord of Change's flock, too subtle to belong to the King of Blood, too plain to worship the Prince of Pleasure. Either it was a basic manifestation of local concerns, or it was the very definition of rot. Given a pox pandemic had sprouted roots nearby, the nightly monstrosity was almost certainly the latter. Disappointing. To think she'd missed an evening with Tiana for a hunt containing nothing worthy of her efforts. Clothing. It was all so terribly small for their body. Miranda would even go so far as to say the attire had been designed for naught but a child. The Nurglish being didn't subsist off the flesh of its victims, but instead it consumed their souls by accelerating their bodies into a state of decay. The horrific conclusion would explain the lack of mouth and bodily decomposition. Simply put, Miranda was staring at a young girl who'd been unlucky enough to not perish in a timely fashion.
I see. How old are you? I know. Little one, this is simply a nightmare. But fret not, for you shall awaken soon. A nightmare. Close your eyes, as if you intend to dream within this dream. Close your eyes. Would you prefer a lullaby